Hey guys, it's Eric, owner of Farpoint Farms, and today we're going to be doing a how-to video, an educational video. This is a Mitsubishi Outlander, a 2005 Mitsubishi Outlander, and this engine was also used in like the Galant, and I think the Mirage, maybe a few others. Mitsubishi's not a huge car company, so they only use 2 or 3 variations of the motors throughout the years. Anyway, this car has a problem. This car is setting a crank sensor code. The reason it's setting a crank sensor code is the water pump's been seeping, and it's drip, drip, drip for a couple months now. I've been meaning to get around to replace it. As a result, that water has gotten down into the crank sensor and damaged it. Well, rather than just tear the whole front end down to replace the crank sensor, I figured I'd go ahead, do the water pump, do the time belt, do the idler belt, and call it a day. So this is kind of a big project. This isn't something that everyone can do. Actually, that's a lie. Everyone can do this. It's just something you want to take your time on. Okay, so if you're thinking about doing a job like a timing belt on your car, first piece of advice I can give you is make sure you have plenty of time to do the job, because it's not something that's simple and it's not something that's quick. Of course, if you do 10, 15, 20 of these things a month, obviously you get quicker at it. But for the average home user, trying to do one of these yourself is still within the realm of possibility. It's just going to take you a good solid day, maybe even a day and a half if something goes wrong or you need to order another part. And that comes to my second thing. If you're planning on doing this, plan on doing it right. Don't cheap out on the parts. Try to get a decent quality replacement kit, the belt. Try to get a name brand belt. Try to get a name brand water pump. You get what you pay for. That's not true with everything in life, but when it comes to car parts, generally speaking, it is. Occasionally you get lucky. More often than not, though, you get burned. So with that said, we're going to dive into this. Now, as you can see, I've taken the first few steps here, but let me run through steps 1 through 3. Step 1 is jack the car up, block it, put it on jack stands. Step 2, you can do this either with the jacks, floor jack underneath the engine to support the engine, or I have a engine hoist or an engine cradle holder here. So what I've done is, it's got a hook in the engine, and I'll show a close-up of that here. And you hook the engine, you support the engine there. And the reason we're doing that is we're going to be taking the front motor mount off in order to get better access to the timing belt area. So those are the first 2 steps. The third step is pull your wheels, and I'm going to do that now, and then we will get started. Now I'm going to be doing the water pump too, so I'm going to go ahead and drain the coolant while I'm getting other stuff ready. Okay? Okay. Once you've got your wheel off on the passenger side of the vehicle, you're going to want to expose the crank and all the lower end of your engine here. And you do that by removing some of these plastic tabs. Here's one here, here's one here, there's a smaller one there. There might be some more underneath. As you can tell, this one's probably been apart before. Some of them are missing. Don't be surprised if some of those little tabs break when you go to take them apart. Plastic gets brittle with age. But we'll go ahead and do that now. There's a special tool for this. I don't have it here at the house, so you just got to work at it with a screwdriver or pair of pliers, whatever works for you. Okay, once you've replaced or removed a few of those clips, you're ready to take a look under here now. Now we've got the bottom of the engine exposed, and this is your tensioner for your drive belt right here. So we're going to go ahead and loosen that up, take the drive belt off. And of course, if the drive belt is cracked or worn, going to be a perfect time to go ahead and replace that too, right? But in this case, it is not so bad, so I'm going to be reusing that. Now, if you're old like me, you may want to make something like this before you take that drive belt off. Yeah, that's my awesome drawing skills right there. That is just a belt routing diagram that I've made for myself. That way, in a few hours when I go to put all this back together again, I won't have to sit there and try to figure out where the belt goes up or over or down or around or whatever. Makes it a whole lot easier, I think you'll agree. So I'll go ahead and take this off. I don't know if I can do this one-handed, probably not, but there is half-inch bar right there. Release the tension. See how the belt's loose? Well, I'm going to have to put the camera down. Okay. Had to put the camera down in order to do that, but there's your belt. And it'll just come off pretty much everything. Yeah, well, I might have to go up top there to get over that last. There it goes. So we'll set that aside if you're going to reuse it. If not, you can toss it and we'll get ready to use a new one. So now let's go back up top. We'll take that motor mount off. Okay, so the next step, we're going to take that top motor mount bracket off and get it out of the way. And you're going to need a 14, a 12, and a 17 to do that. Makes perfect sense, right, Mitsubishi? 3 different size bolts for one bracket? Right. Anyway, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to be using an air gun. You certainly don't have to. A regular wrench will do the trick too. Okay, so once you've got the, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6 bolts loose, we'll go ahead and get that bracket out of the way. Take the ground wire loose, collect our nuts and bolts here. Remember now, the tension has to be off the engine at this point in order for this to come loose. Oh, yeah, there's washers there. And then your bracket's off. Now we've exposed a little more of the timing belt area. And the next step we're going to do here is remove this top cover. To do that, you're going to want to release these plastic tabs for the wiring harness. Just slide those back, get them back out of the way, give you a little bit more room. You've got a connector here. Gonna see that there? We're going to unhook that as well. Move that out of the way. That gives us a little more clearance. Now the timing belt upper cover is usually 10 millimeter, and you're probably going to run into a couple of 12s as well. Okay, we're just going to remove those 10s and those 12s there and get this out of the way. And there's a metal bracket. When you remove these 12s, that'll also come loose. Just make sure you remember where all this stuff goes. Well, I've been working on cars since 1993 professionally, which is pretty much the beginning of time in the automotive field. Most mechanics don't stick around that long. The ones that do have usually moved up to owning their own shops by this point in their careers. I chose not to do that. I took a different path. And I don't regret it, surprisingly enough. Okay, so your bracket comes off. We'll set that aside. And again, you're going to move your harness back as far as possible, just to kind of get it out of the way. Got one more 10 millimeter. Now it feels like a 12 down there. I need to get loose. Okay. There's your cover. That's your upper timing belt cover. Notice it's got a little rubber gasket there, and it also has another gasket along the inside. Depending on if your car has some major oil leaks or whatnot, or how many years it has on it, you may have these be swollen or have fallen out. Try to reuse them if possible, but if they're in danger of falling into the timing belt area because they just won't stay in place, dispose of those gaskets. Okay, I'd rather have a little bit of dust intrusion getting in there than have one of these rubber gaskets slide in there and throw your timing belt. So let's move on to the next step, and that's going to be getting our timing right up on top dead center 0. And I'll get a close-up of it, but here's your timing mark here on the engine case, and we'll line the gear up. There should be a mark on the gear that we're going to line up next. Okay, there you can see the timing mark on the case, right? So we're going to go underneath and line up the, we're going to rotate the crank until we find the mark on the gear, and we'll match those two up. Alright, this is hard to see, but you can use just a 1/2 inch extension on this, or if you want to use the socket, it's a 22. You're going to have to pull that nut off, so that's entirely up to you, but I don't know if you can see it. I'll rotate it just a smidge more. Right there, maybe if I get a flashlight, that might make it worse. There is a very small notch on the back side of this. Again, thanks a lot, Mitsubishi. Way to think about your techs. But that's going to be rotated around, and if you can see over here, here's your timing mark indicator on the case itself, or on the lower timing belt cover. So we're going to line that notch up with that. And then, as an added safety, I'm going to paint something on there to make it brighter and to make it less of a mystery as far as where exactly this thing's going to sit. Alright, I doubt you can see it. It's just the way it is. Yeah, maybe barely. That little teeny notch right there is set up on there. That is top dead center. We can verify that by going back up, and we should now see a mark on our upper gear that matches the mark on the case. Well, what do you know? There it is. Again, that's a pretty small mark. I'm going to go ahead and clean off those surfaces and paint that. So I have my own set of marks as well as factory marks that'll lead to less confusion when it's time to put this thing back together. I recommend you do the same. Voila! Look at that. A little easier to see those marks now, isn't it? I've done the same thing on the bottom, although it's still hard to see. But you can kind of make it out a little better anyway. In person, of course, it looks a little better, but I can crawl up in there. So that's that. Now it's time to move on. Let's go ahead and we're going to remove the crank pulley, which is going to be 4 12mm and a 22 that are going to have to come off. Now this one you're probably going to need an air gun for, although if you have a chain holder, then you could always wrap that around this pulley to hold it while somebody else hold it while you break it loose. And then we're also going to remove our tensioner, which is I think a 14 and a 12 to get that off. So we'll have to remove those two. And then we're also going to be removing that idler, and that's a 14 right there. So something to pay attention to when you're taking this stuff apart is go ahead and spin your tensioner. Should be nice and quiet. No noise, right? Same thing. And you can do the same thing with your AC, and you can do your same thing with your alternator. You want to spin everything. If you're not replacing the water pump too. If you hear any kind of grinding, any kind of resistance, it should be as smooth as butter, just slipping through there. If you feel anything or hear anything that's unusual, now's the time to replace it because you're going to have all this stuff apart. So that's a mechanic tip for you that you probably should know if you don't already. I'm going to go ahead and start taking these off, and then I'll show you what it looks like without it. Okay, here we are. As you can see, got the tensioner here, or the idler here. Tensioner here is off as well. And we've exposed the lower cover. You can see I've got some leakage here. That may even be an oil leak as well, but it's definitely a coolant leak that I've been suffering from here. So I'll get a better look at that once I get it all the way apart. Again, there's your mark on your timing cover there, and something you want to keep track of. As far as when you take those 4 bolts off to remove this pulley, there is a roll pin there, so it can only go back on one way. That way you'll line back up the way you should be. And while you have all this stuff apart, it's a good time to make even brighter and better marks, which I will do while I have this all tore down. So the next step is to go ahead and loosen up these bottom bolts. Looks like all 10s down here, so we can start to think about removing our lower timing belt cover. Okay, so once you've got all the bolts loose, and there's a couple down here, one little stud, bunch of bolts, and then there's one on each side towards the upper half. You see that one there. There's another one that's easier to get to from the top. So you got that loose. You think, oh man, I'm ready to go. Now, that is what's next. Those 4 bolts there have to come off. That's the water pump pulley. And you have to get that out of the way in order to do the rest of this job. And it's kind of a tricky task, but you just kind of hold the pulley with one hand and break those little bolts loose with the other. So let me get on that. It also is easier to get this from the bottom. You could take the motor mount completely off on the top. It might help you with holding it if you have a partner or a helper, but I'm going to try to do this from the bottom, which means laying on my back. Alright, so getting to those is pretty tough. They're 10 millimeter. What I try to do is I'll get down here and just pry with a screwdriver, and that'll hold that pulley straight while I work on replacing those. I hope this shows up, but the idea is the same. The bigger the screwdriver, the better, but if you can hold down on that with enough force, it'll hold that pulley straight while you break those 4 10 millimeter bolts loose. So I'm going to do that right now. Alright, so once you get the 4 bolts out of there, and that was, I'm sure, fun as it was for you as it was for me, kind of wiggle that pulley until it drops out. Now you've exposed your water pump. I wish I had better lighting here, gentlemen. There we go. And should just be able to pull the cover. Oh, I got one more 10 millimeter right there I missed, hidden behind the pulley. So let me get that out of there, and then we'll be able to pull this cover out and down. And it'll be time to make some more paint marks. Okay, now that I've removed that hidden one there, I'll go ahead and pull this forward lightly. And slide it down out of the way. Alright, there you go. Looks like we got ourselves a timing belt. Wasn't that interesting? Can't help but notice that this timing gear, this pulley right here, is not lined up with the mark. The last person to do this job did not do this one right. That is supposed to line up with that right there. It's all part of the counter shaft. That's very interesting. That, you can see, right there is lined up. But that one ain't. Isn't that interesting? Alright, well, as you can see, we got some definite coolant leaks going on here. And we're going to take care of that while we got it apart. This is my sensor that I need to fix. And we'll do that as well. Alright, so the whole thing is kind of a dirty mess. So the first thing I want to do is assess if I have oil leaks, where they're coming from. It looks like I have mainly coolant leaks. So I don't think I'm going to be replacing any seals, although that looks like oil up there. I'll take a look on the top. Cam seal's dry. Yeah, I think all that's just pretty much from the water pump, so I'll probably just replace the water pump. What I am going to do is get a can of brake cleaner or carburetor cleaner or any kind of cleaner and wash all that crud off, all the coolant, all the oil, clean up every surface so I can make some paint marks. That way it makes it a little easier, takes some of the guesswork out when putting it back together. Okay, so I've got everything cleaned off really nicely. I've got paint marks on the counterbalance shaft there and on the oil pulley. When it comes off, I'll line it back up there. There's also fresh marks there. So, and of course there's the mark we made earlier on the cam gear. So now it's time to go ahead and take these belts off. And that is 2 12 millimeter bolts right there. We're going to take that off, pull the tensioner out. Now we've got those 2 12 millimeter bolts out of the way, and they're quite long. You're going to take your tensioner off, clean it, inspect it. I'm going to end up reusing this, so we'll recompress it here in a while. But back to the car. Alright, you've got the tension released. You can just slide the tensioner and get that belt loose. And snake it around the top there, and you'll have it off. Next, we'll focus on getting the counterbalance shaft belt off as well. So the timing belt's out of the way. Here's your counterbalance shaft, and this is a 12 millimeter bolt, and you can see it's eccentric. It rotates up. Now, as far as the tension goes, you know, you can see the amount of play there. We're not going crazy. So, of course, there's a special tool for this that no one, including the dealership, carries. You just got to kind of use your best judgment. You can make some marks here to give you an indication as to where the pulley was before. And I might do that. I'll take a paint mark. That'll kind of help me line that up. And while we're looking at pulleys, as you can see this one here. Oh, wow. I got it on the first try. This is a weighted shaft here. So, you see how it wants to go back to 0? You can screw that up if I put it here now, right? But if I touched it, see how it wants to roll back? Perfect. That's where you want it, to where it kind of wants to center on that. And that's to keep this and that in balance. If you don't get that right, car will vibrate pretty heavily at about 2,500 RPM. That's not something you want. So I'm going to get a 12 millimeter. I might make a mark here, and then I'm going to pull this off. This belt will come off, and we'll be ready to get the water pump out of the way. And now that we got the countershaft tensioner out of the way, as you can see, it's an oblong hole. We'll just go ahead and slide that off too. And that's a bit tricky because it doesn't have a whole lot of slack to begin with. But we'll kind of work that off until it comes out. Now I'm going to need both hands for it. And then it'll be time to pull the water pump off. All right, I've got that loose. And I forgot, you got to take this off too. This is your crank sensor. And I'm taking mine off because it's broken. It got water intrusion in there and it's damaged. So I'll take that off. The belt will fall out of the way. And I'm not going to reinstall that until after we're done with the water pump and all that, because I don't want any fresh water getting on there. And even though you drain the engine, you're still going to have some water caught behind that water pump. So 2 10 millimeter bolts, we'll have this off. I'll set it on the ground. All right, so as you can see here, we've got a lower cover, both the belts, the pulley, tensioner, all the little components here. There's your hydraulic tensioner. I've got all that off, so the only thing left to take off now is the other 2 tensioners, if you're going to be replacing those, or idlers, and the water pump. And I'm going to be doing the water pump, so here we go.
Something that needs a little fixing on Farpoint Farms. Freedom is mighty sweet. Liberty sows its seed at Farpoint.